You're listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 287.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Happy March. Welcome to another episode. As always, so excited to be here. And again, thank you to everyone who is a regular listener, and welcome to any new listeners that we have today. Today on the podcast, I'm excited to have an interview with Lorraine Karlstrom. Lorraine has been interested in food and cooking for most of her life, including roles as a cook, where she cooked at a backcountry cabin in the Canadian Rockies, volunteered at an organic farm, served as a leader for the Weston A. Price Foundation, and teaching cooking classes. Lorraine is the author of Rue's Kitchen, Bone Broth Soups and Sourdough Sides, nourishing recipes inspired by friends, family, and life playing in nature. I am very proud to say that Lorraine is a graduate of the 2023 cohort of Cookbooks on KDP, and the book that we are talking about today, she wrote and published as a result of being in the program last year. So if you have a collection of recipes that you want to publish in a book, the doors for our 2024 group program, Cookbooks on KDP, are now open. In this 12-week program, I will help you learn step-by-step how to publish a book of recipes on Amazon. When you complete the program, you will have completed 2 types of recipe books to share your recipes with family and friends, or to give away this year as holiday gifts. Talk about having a jump on the holiday gift-giving season. If you want to learn more about this offer and joining the program, head on over to www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/KDP2024. And I did link to that in the show notes, and you can read more details about the program. And if you decide to do so, become one of the students that I'm going to work with starting the week of March the 18th. So without further delay, I'm excited to bring you this interview with cookbook author and graduate of the 2023 Cookbooks on KDP program, Lorraine Karlstrom. Hi, Lorraine. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Oh, thank you, Maggie. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. You have a journey to cookbook writing that is unique as you are. But why don't we start with having you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, where you live, and what you do?
Sure. I grew up in a very active family in Banff, Alberta, Canada. And I started getting interested in cooking when I was in my early teens, actually. And my mom was not really into cooking. I remember one time when she was down at the tennis courts and I had to call down there to say, "What's for dinner, Mom?" She said, "Just throw those frozen fish sticks in the oven." And I thought, there's more to cooking than that. So that's where my journey kind of began. And when I was in my 20s, I started having digestive issues. And I, was told just to avoid certain foods. And I did. And I kind of went through life like that until about 40. And then that's when I really started researching, like, what could I do to help my digestion? And that's when I started bumbling across traditional cooking techniques and how they might help us. And I just started, it just resonated with me right away. Yeah. And one of the books I definitely got influenced by Nourishing Traditions right away. And I found that many families have let these important techniques go. And I wanted to try to bring them back. And that's one way I've done it, by cooking classes, becoming a nutritional consultant, and now writing this cookbook.
Yeah. So why don't you, a couple things. When you're 20 and you have this interest in cooking, I wonder what sparked that, or do you have the digestive issues at 20? But as a teenager, what was it about the kitchen and wanting to go in there that attracted you?
That, I do believe some of us are sort of born with
Yeah.
certain things we love.
Yeah.
I came from a big family. I was in the middle of 6 children. I guess I don't know. I just found cooking kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's when I got a little tiny, someone gave me a little blank cookbook, and I started writing things down and asking everyone that I knew, what's your recipe for this? What's your recipe for that? So I think some of us just have a natural tendency towards that.
Yeah. I think you're
And
right. And I think that, I mean, my family was big too. And I think the people that saw me like interested in like reading cookbooks and doing stuff in the kitchen, they're like, what in the world is like even going on? Like, why? But I was as interested in that as you were, as other people might be, and other things, other hobbies, other pursuits.
For sure.
yeah.
Yes, I was too. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I definitely, cooking was sort of on the sidelines for many years for me because I was so active in sports, and I did not pursue cooking for quite a while.
Yeah.
Like I would say in my 40s is when I really got serious.
Yeah. So when you say traditional cooking methods, and that was a kind of a opening a door into a world of cooking that really did help your digestive issues, what does it mean, traditional cooking methods?
Well, I think for me, what it meant was what our families would have done a long time ago to prepare meals. So, of course, one of the things is bone broths. And so people boiling the bones after, whether it's beef bones, lamb bones, chicken bones, fish bones. And then when I realized that actually some of the nutrients that come from the bones can actually help us, they give us nutrients, they help us digest. And the other technique that I really grabbed onto was sourdough. And that's a traditional technique. Instead of using fast rising yeast, you use the wild yeast from the air around us. The other thing that I also am into, but I didn't write about in this cookbook, is sauerkraut. So the natural fermenting, which people have been doing in Europe and around the world in Asia for thousands and thousands of years. And I guess I feel like I was born in the 60s, and I think that's when we really got away from anything traditional. My mom did a little bit of bones, soup bones, but we had white bread with fast rising yeast. We had probably pickles that were made with vinegar. They weren't traditionally fermented. I think I didn't have raw milk with kefir grains in them, like I think is very important now. So I think sometimes in that era, we went away from these traditional, in some families. I'll talk to people that came over quite recently from, say, Eastern Europe, and they're like, oh, no, we have kombucha, which is a traditional drink. We've always had sauerkraut, and I remember still making it up to this date. So it's not like all of us lost it. I think just a huge percentage in the US and Canada did. Yeah. That's what I think.
Yeah. And in your book, you choose to focus specifically on bone broth soups and sourdough sides. So let's start with, which one do you want to start with? Bone broth, sourdough. I'd like to walk a little bit through like starting it. Why don't we do the sourdough? That is the first thing I think that comes to mind for me. I automatically think of sourdough when I think of the pandemic. I think it's so funny that people, suddenly they're at home, they've got a lot of time. So how many people turn to making sourdough bread?
Oh, so many. And so many people. I used to teach sourdough classes up in Canada when I was living there. And so some people knew me as a sourdough person, but believe it or not, at the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't even have my sourdough starter anymore.
Wow.
I had kind of let it go. I was more into some other things, and I actually went and got some more of it. And started back into it again. And that inspired me. But I've always really been into sourdough for sure. Yeah. And we have now, another reason I wasn't doing it as much, there's a lot of local bakeries, small artisan bakers that are now back, they're into sourdough. So you don't actually have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But
I didn't know you could buy the starter.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. There's actually a company called Azure Standards in Oregon that'll ship it anywhere in the US, and anyone can ship it. Most people share it with people.
Right.
It's one of those things kind of like the kombucha mother culture. You just keep sharing it because you have so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that about it.
Yeah. So do you like to start your own, or once you start it, you keep it going or buying it? I mean, I don't know if there's an advantage or disadvantage of either one.
Well, it's interesting. There's some science behind some of this stuff. And some people believe that even if you did get a sourdough starter, say from San Francisco, so that's the famous place, and some of those people claim those sourdoughs came over, during the Mayflower, and they brought them, and they're thousands of years, hundreds of years old, and they could be. But the minute you get sourdough, say from San Francisco, and I bring it to Oregon, the wild yeast around me, around my body, around the air in Oregon, is going to slightly change it. So it actually won't be just like the sourdough. Some people think some of the strains are strong enough to hold and it'll keep going, but there's some interesting science behind it. I like to get mine from somebody and then go. I have started my own, but it's a long process. It takes about a week to get one going. And it's so much easier and fun to share and get it from somebody else.
Yeah. I went to a fermenting class. Gosh, this has probably been 15 years ago, up at a place called the Cincinnati Nature Center. And it was about fermented foods, but the other purpose of it was to share your ferments with people.
Yes.
So they encouraged you to come to the class and learn, but if you wanted to take any ferments home, to bring a container to take them home. I was like floored at the number of things that people had there to share.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad traditional foods are coming back. I think we really went off. Honestly, I think in the 60s, we were eating like microwave food and, box food, just awful stuff constantly. It became the norm instead of, and I think it happened. There were so many things that happened. A lot of mothers went to work for the first time. So no one was home to deal with all this, traditional foods. We needed something quick. I think we were convinced by the commercial, corporate sponsors of all these things to, just have this quick instant meal, whether it's instant cocoa or, instant oatmeal. I think that we all got kind of convinced that was the way to go. And I think I just love to bring these things back, the traditional ways. Right. I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, and you probably know if we are interested in, getting the starter, creating sourdough baked products in our own kitchen around a family and having jobs. Tell us some secrets and things that we might want to consider when we do this.
Oh, the biggest thing is, I guess, planning ahead. And also, I know some people that they only do it on the weekends. So say Friday night, they make a big batch of sourdough products, whatever they want, whether it's bagels or the bread. Bread is more common. And then you could freeze them. You slice it up and freeze it and have it for the whole week. And the same thing with the broths. Make a big, big thing of bone broths on Saturday and Sunday, and then have them all frozen in containers to pull during the week. There's also, and I do explain a little bit, there's ways to slow down and speed up sourdough processing. So say you're started the sourdough and I have this time, I set it with times, like start at 4 p.m., mix it at 8 p.m., at 7 a.m. the next morning, do this. And then all of a sudden you get it. Oh my God, I have an emergency, or I forgot about the soccer game I was going to go see. Just put it in the fridge. It starts to slow it down. And then when you come back, it's pretty forgiving. You can restart it. So I say to people, don't stress that, sourdough, when you think about it in the old days, they didn't have, some of their houses weren't heated consistently, and they didn't have refrigeration. So that it's pretty hardy and forgiving. But I think just organizing your time and maybe possibly doing this more on your weekends than the very first time you do it, then you won't be as stressed out.
Yeah. And you have a great question and answer section about sourdough, things such as, do I need to use organic flour? What's the ratio? How do I feed the starter? But tell us a little bit about the breadth of recipes that you have in here for sourdough sides, because it's obviously not just a loaf of bread.
Right. Yeah. No, I love just some of them I kind of came up with myself. Some of them, of course, are just standard, bagels. The one that's very special to me is the pancakes. And that's a great way when you're working with sourdough, you feed it flour and water, and sometimes you end up with a lot of of sourdough starter because you're not using it in any recipes. And I always say, when you get too much, just go and make some pancakes. And for me, I called it Dad's pancakes and waffles. Of course, the waffles are, all you have to do is whip the egg whites and add them in instead of adding the whole egg in. So it's very similar recipe. And for me, when I was young, my mom, who was a marathon runner, she was training in the morning. And my dad, it's amazing, back in the 60s and 70s, that he took on getting us up in the morning. There's 6 of us. He got us all up. He usually made us some great breakfast, and one of them was pancakes. He'd make tons of stacks and stacks of pancakes and get us all out the door. And then my mom would be finished her run. And then she usually either, would drive us. We lived a mile out of town. And I just wanted to honor my dad. He didn't make sourdough pancakes necessarily, but I wanted to honor him, that he was such a forward dad back in the 70s to have done that and allow his wife to train for a marathon and serve us these beautiful pancakes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the fun recipes. The other one's Scottish oat bread is sort of inspired by my Scottish grandmother. I have Mount Rundle layered rolls, and that's just the name of a mountain that was in my hometown. And we viewed it every day from our house. And I wanted to make kind of croissants, but I was trying to simplify the real croissant recipe. As you know, it's quite complicated.
Yeah.
So I just tried to, that's why I called them layered rolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about looking at that mountain, you said in the book that your childhood home in Banff was a house that your dad built.
Yes.
And that from the house, you could see the mountain every day.
Yes, that's it.
So he not only made pancakes, he built your house that you lived in.
He was quite a guy. He made it to the age of 91, and he's very talented. And, I was saying that about traditional ways. He was one of the last kind of people that I know personally that knew how to hunt, fish, build a house, do all these sort of things. And we've sort of lost those people. And I do believe he was just one of those guys. He just learned to do a lot of hands-on things all through his life. He was poor growing up. His grandfather was into trapping, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And he's actually in my book also. And so I think these traditional techniques and also traditional ways of a lot of our seniors was that they could build, they could cook, they could hunt, whatever. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think that fits right in with the traditional food techniques and things that we do with the fermenting sourdough and bone broth. It all just kind of ties together when you think about the kinds of things that your dad did. I was fascinated with your mom and the athlete that she was.
Yeah, she was pretty extreme. I actually think sometimes she died very young, unfortunately, at 51. And I think sometimes the extreme of her was maybe part of her demise in a way. She was a champion ski racer. That's kind of how I grew up as a ski racer also. And she was into tennis. She was the first woman to ever finish a marathon in our province of Alberta, up in Canada. And so she also instilled a love of sports, but to the point where maybe that's why I got into cooking, because she could care less about the food. She just wanted to get it on the table, feed 6 of us. And I thought maybe that's where it came from, that it was a bit of a need. Yeah. I just saw that she was overwhelmed and would rather be playing tennis. And so I was like, oh, I like being in the kitchen. Maybe I'll just help her along. And that's when maybe I started getting into it more.
Yeah. So if someone's going to venture into the territory of starting to make bone broth, why don't you walk us through that a little bit?
Well, I always find if it's best if you can find a local farmer that actually has cows that are traditionally raised, meaning that they're out on the field and the field hasn't been sprayed by chemicals. So a nice healthy cow or chickens, lambs, any of these things, or wild fish that you can get some bones with a little bit of meat attached to them. The one that I make the most is actually chicken bone broth. And I find a local farmer and I find out, were these chickens raised in a humane way? Were they out in the real fields, pastures, eating bugs, what normal chickens do? And then I either roast the chicken and then take the bones, or if it's a small kind of very bony or with not a lot of meat, I'll just take the whole chicken and put it in. But the secret to chicken broth is actually known as the Jewish secret, is that they use feet, the chicken feet.
Wow.
And some people get very grossed out. My husband's like, don't put that picture of the chicken foot in your book. And I said, no, this is important. It leaves a lot of gelatin.
Yes. And I think it adds some body to the broth, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Because the gelatin is definitely has some body. Yeah. So I always encourage people to find a farmer that is willing to save the feet and clean them. Yeah. And that's becoming more common now at farmers markets. You could talk to chicken farmers and they're willing to save the feet. So I think we're really in a great time now where we're bringing back a lot of these old ways so we can find all these things.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of that, though, is as you develop a relationship with the farmer, you get to know them, they get to know you. They know they have an outlet for these things that they maybe are throwing away.
Exactly. Oh, yes. A lot of them used to throw away a lot of the insides. Now people want the liver and the heart and the feet and the bone. So, a lot of the beef farmers, the butchers, they used to throw a lot of the stuff away. And so I think this is great that we're bringing it back. And there's so many people that are instrumental in this big shift. I think it's great.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that the time is really ripe for connecting to farmers. If we're not growing and creating agricultural products ourselves, there are people in almost all states that are. And through community-supported agriculture programs, farmers markets, all you have to do is walk up and strike up a conversation with someone who's selling something like chicken or beef and tell them what you want to do. And they will either tell you they have availability to bring it to you or not. And then you have a way to get it, which is wonderful.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
That's great. So then with the bone broth, you say you can, if you make it like a large batch, you can freeze it, obviously, and then you use it in your cooking and making soups and stews and chilies. Tell us a little bit about those that you love to make.
Yeah. So once you have a really good broth, and like I say, I freeze them and then I pull them out whenever I want to make a stew. I mean, there's ones that my favorite, I call the Mount Hood chili. And that's a famous mountain right near where I'm from. And I'll have to tell you about taking that photo. That was a big deal. I really wanted to tie in my love of kind of the outdoors and nature and a little history with my cooking. So I wanted to take a picture of the chili that it's named after with the mountain. So at about 3 a.m, I woke up and heated up my chili, put it in a thermos, cooked the Skier's corn muffins, packed it into my car. And I had to drive quite a ways to get to this certain spot where we could see the mountain. And then I set this all up. And finally at that golden hour, as the photographers call, because it was early in the summer, I had to be there early and to get this photo. And I was so pleased that it turned out that ended up being my shot on the front cover, and it's also in the book.
Yeah, but beautiful.
So instead of, that's where I use the beef bone broth is in my chili, and then things like Thanksgiving leftover soup, that's just a leftover carcass from the turkey, and I'll boil that, and then the next day I'll use some of the vegetables from the Thanksgiving dinner and mix that up, and I love that soup. That's always a favorite at after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the recipe for the Skier's corn muffins that go with that. And you're right. The times that you have in the directions really show people how at different times of the day you can take these steps so that you have the corn muffins. It kind of gives it a process for someone to follow, which I think is wonderful. Otherwise, people are really just on their own, like trying to figure the times out of how to even incorporate this into their life.
Yeah, I know that at the beginning when I started sourdough, I was confused and I wished I could have just followed, just giving me a time. When am I supposed to knead it? When am I supposed to punch it down? So now I guess when I went to do this cookbook, I just thought, I'm going to put it this way. You can certainly start it anytime you want, but it gives you an idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful. Very good. No, and the picture is beautiful for the Mount Hood chili, and on the front of the cover, it's very striking. And I guess that was well worth your time. Did you have to lay on the ground to get that shot? It looks like the angle is it's like I see the grass also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was laying on my stomach. Yes, I was a true photographer, which I'm really not.
I know. That is a challenge. So that leads us to the discussion about your book and the process for actually. Obviously, you're a cook. You had the recipes. You had the processes. Writing all those down and getting that. But getting the book created and published was something that you decided to do on your own. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I've been wanting to write a cookbook for a long time, and I just kept putting it off. I had a website. People have asked me for some of my recipes, and I also wanted to share them. I've always never been one to hide or secretive about my recipes. So I thought, now that the kids are out of the house, which they were a long time ago, I'm not saying that I don't have that excuse, and I'm working more part-time. I thought, okay, this is the time. And my kids and my husband were very supportive.
Yeah.
They said, just start it. So I had this I still have it. It's on my counter right now, a massive binder of all my favorite recipes. But because it was too massive, I never got started until I joined your class. Your class, the self-publishing cookbooks on KDP, was awesome to get me to say, focus in on maybe 30 recipes, I think you said, or 20. I think you said something like that. Yeah. And that's when I really thought, you're right. I don't need to make my first cookbook like, Joy of Cooking 5 million.
Exactly.
So then I thought, okay, how do I pull one or two of my favorite subjects? And that's when I guess I thought sourdough, and I like bone broth going with it. I just wanted to have the combination.
Yeah.
I also wanted to have a photo of every recipe because I love photos in recipe books. And so I think the process was first joining your class, then learning about photography. I hired a professional photographer in our area, and he came and gave us, my husband and I, actually lessons. And he explained a lot of stuff. My husband has been a photographer for windsurfing action shots. And he was comfortable with the camera that he was showing us. He was showing us on this, $10,000 camera. And so I thought, okay, well, first of all, I can't afford that kind of a camera. So he was giving us our ideas. But the minute he left, within that week, my husband says, you know what? I think you need to take the photos. Because if you're in the middle of pulling something out of the oven, and he does construction, he's be up on a ladder and a roof, an hour away. There's no way this is going to work. So that's when I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do I get these photos? And so the idea came that, why don't I just get the latest iPhone 14 Pro? It'll take photos in RAW, which if you're a photographer, RAW just means larger. You can do some manipulating. And so that was a huge breakthrough for me, that I just got a simpler setup for my photography. And that was made the biggest difference for me.
That's amazing that you were able to take them all on the iPhone Pro.
I know, amazing. Because I guess it's the first year, that 14 Pro, that they've had that ability to have what they call RAW photos, like the larger ones. So I had to get a lot of memory on there. But once I felt comfortable with that, because it is a lot simpler than having a telephoto lens, and then I was able to, luckily I have a west facing kitchen with big windows. A lot of the photos were done there.
Yeah.
So and tripod. So I had all those extra little things that were really great.
And you mentioned, when you do self-publish a book, you're responsible for everything that goes into the book, including the photos and the layout for the page design, and finding a place to actually upload the files and get it printed, which is why in that class we chose to use KDP. But I think that you touched on something really important. When we want to write a cookbook, we sometimes do think so big.
Yes.
And we forget that once we learn how to do it, or once we get published, we can always do another book.
Exactly. I think that so many people think it's overwhelming by
Yeah.
thinking of the whole thing.
Exactly.
But I think you really, really helped me focus in on not being so broad.
Yeah.
And then you're right. It's not once you learn the process, then
Yeah.
you're able to make more. And yes, I think that's where I had to come up with a title that might go with other ones. And that's where I ended up calling it Rue's Kitchen,
Yeah.
which is a nickname from when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And
then
I
you
guess
could then the next one, it could be Rue's Kitchen. It could be 2 other types of traditional cooking method foods that go into that book, perhaps. The other thing is since you self-publish, you can also always expand or change the file. And that's one thing that we talked about before we started recording. We do make mistakes when we write cookbooks. We don't intend to, but tell us a little bit about what your revelation was about that.
Oh, yeah. I think this is incredible. Well, I'm not a writer. It's not my thing. And I'm very, very, I think if in English in school, I probably got a C at best. And so when I was writing this, luckily I have a very good friend as well as my husband and son that are very good at editing. They can see things that I can't. So giving it to them to edit, especially my good friend Kathy Lannon, she was very instrumental in helping edit.
Yeah.
But even with that many eyes, because for some reason people miss things, or I want to change the wording, or someone will read it and not understand it. And with the way you can do this self-publishing that's just sort of magical is you can have another edit edition very easily.
Yeah.
You just go into the KDP after you've changed it. And I worked with Canva on Canva's, which is that editing program.
Correct.
And I just update it and then I re-upload it onto KDP. And then you could have second edition or second edit, I think, or third edit. And that's quite amazing because when you're first starting to write a cookbook, first of all, you want to get it out fast. And then when you go too fast, you probably don't give it the time it needs to properly edit it.
Yeah. And it's easy to rush through that part. But when you do self-publish, because you can change the file, if you notice, a fraction is wrong or you want to maybe fix something that doesn't make sense, it is a lot easier in the self-publishing process. I think it's fascinating, though, that you created this cookbook, Lorraine, and you didn't think of yourself as a writer or a photographer.
Not at all. No, I know. It was a huge challenge. I'm a total lover of cooking. I love cookbooks. I've seen so many photos of food. I've always been into cookbooks. So, I understood what a cookbook's supposed to look like. I understood, all those parts, but I didn't get the whole part of like the writing, the editing, the photography. The funniest thing is the page numbering. I had it completely wrong. And I know you probably said it in the class, but of course I probably didn't hear that. There was so much to learn every class. And then when I was just about to send off the final thing, I had this sample book and my son says, "Mom, you need to have the odd numbers on the right." I said, "Oh, well, mine's not going to have that." He says, "No, every book has to have that, Mom."
You have to fix it.
I laughed so hard. I'm like, "Why can't mine be different?" And he said, "No, it has to be." I thought, really? Is that a rule? And sure enough, I went to go put it out there without changing it. And it said, I think KDP, the actual program will say it. It'll catch it.
That's one thing I love about using KDP is it does not let you move forward and push that publish button unless certain parameters are met.
Right. Yeah. So yes, there's so many little things you learn, and it's just a great process. And I really enjoyed it, even though it's been a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, and I think, but you now have unlocked this whole part of you that's able to do this that wasn't unlocked this time last year.
Exactly.
We did that class from, was it May through July of 2023?
Yes.
So, last year in March, you probably were like, I don't know, I still should probably write a cookbook, but I don't know how. I've got all these recipes. I'm overwhelmed by the whole thought of it.
Yes, and I started listening to your podcast. That's how I found out about it. I was searching everywhere, videos, YouTube, like how to write a cookbook. I bought a book on how to write a cookbook. I forget who wrote that one. But so I was trying all angles. I'm like, I am going to get this. I was determined to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think once hearing that, oh, you could be in this program and learn along with you, I thought that's the best way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I didn't teach it where I like gave you videos to watch like every week. I literally like taught it because I wanted to learn too. That's one reason I decided to do. Thought, well, I'm going to teach this. I'm going to learn myself, and I'm going to teach people. We'll just learn together as we go along. What was the value of doing that live versus having to depend on videos?
Oh, live for me, I mean, I would actually ultimately love to do in person.
Yeah.
Live, I think, because at the moment you were able to answer some of our questions that we had at the moment, where if you're watching a video, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then when you have other people in the class, they are having issues that you might have later or you've already had, and they're just asking it. So it was nice to see other people, and I'm looking forward to finding their books online too, to buy them. I'd love to see.
Yeah.
I think there was how many in our class?
I think there were 10 or 12. A couple of people were crossovers from the traditional publishing course that I have. But I know that of the people that, were not crossovers, I bet 4 or 5 of you have finished and completed some sort of a book. The funny thing is, I don't know if you remember at the very beginning of the class, we all did a basic recipe notebook.
Oh, yes.
Just to get the gist of how these books went together.
Right.
And then we took that and then we went to the recipe book. And I thought that was really valuable too, to just kind of get a feel for where do these pages even come from? How do we even design the layout? What about the cover? All the things that go into this book. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Teaching it live was fun. It was great to get to know you all. And I have to say that as the person that taught the class, I not only learned a lot, but it's so wonderful to see your dream of writing a cookbook come true.
Thank you. Yes. It was a great.
Yeah. So what if there's someone listening that doesn't think they're a writer or a photographer? What would you tell them?
Oh, I would say if you have a tiny bit of a dream to produce any kind of book, and whether it has photos or not, I mean, if you have something to pass on, whether it's just for your family or you think you're going to be some next bestseller, it's just start small and I looked and I mean, I definitely read books and looked online for the information, but start small and just start the process.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere.
You do. And I just talked to someone in another podcast that I recorded, and she self-published her book first and then went on to traditionally publish. And one of the barriers a lot of people have about self-publishing is they think that once they do it, they'll no longer be able to traditionally publish a cookbook. And that's not true.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So you know that, and everybody knows that, it's a good way to get your feet wet, to test out a topic. You can see how it's going. You can modify it. You can change it. And then it might actually give you the legs and the desire to actually go a little bit bigger, find an agent or a publisher maybe in your region that publishes books about, Oregon, or cookbooks about Oregon. I mean, there's all kinds, the sky's kind of the limit once you actually understand how to do it. And for that, you don't have to do photography unless you want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
exactly.
But you would still, I think that being a cook is the most important thing about writing a cookbook. Being able to put the words on the page about what you write is also important. But the self-identity as a cook that really has processes and things that we know how to do and that we want to share with people is really, truly the internal work that drives all these projects.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I love cookbooks that have a little bit of a story. And I think of one of them, it's called Full Moon Feast, and it's by Jessica Prentice. And I remember reading through hers. I just love a little bit of personal stories. And it was a little bit hard for me to talk about my personal stories, but I did get the encouragement from many people that support what I was doing that, yes, put those in there. People like to read about little personal things in a cookbook also. It doesn't just have to be how to boil an egg and, how to make a cupcake. It can be, I got this recipe from grandma, or
exactly.
Some history. I like that.
And I think also the story about your mom comes through with her athleticism, the story about your dad obviously building the house. So people get a little bit of an insight and a peek into who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and maybe where some of this ingenuity came from. I think it's fascinating and a beautiful thing to read. And it does tie in Oregon so well too. A lot of nice shots of Oregon, talking about Oregon and your growing up in Canada as well. So it's just a thrill to see it. I can't it's almost more exciting to me to get a book like this from someone that did the work to self-publish. I enjoy getting any cookbook in the mail, don't get me wrong, but this was really great to receive. And it's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
How has it felt once you got it then and you get to share it with people, your family, friends, maybe people buying it that you don't even know?
Yeah, I decided to have a kind of launch party at my house. So I had it in, quote, Rue's kitchen, which is my kitchen.
Yeah.
And I'm in a unique situation. My house is in a commercial zone, so I could do anything I want. So I had a big launch. I had people I didn't know. I had some family members. I had lots of friends that stopped in, and I made samples of the soup. I had the Mount Hood chili. I had my roasted squash, and I had the borscht that I learned up in Canada. And then I had some sides for them to try with it, crackers, corn muffins, and the rye, the seeded rye bread. And it was great. It was a really fun event. And I sold about 100 books that day.
Nice.
And then after that, a few local stores in town are carrying my book.
Nice.
And because it does have that local flair, it sort of has a little niche here.
Yeah.
And of course, back in my hometown of Banff, I do have a place that's selling it too.
Nice.
So it's been fun. Yeah. And then I have a sister with a store and a very big promoter. So she has, in her tiny town of 3,000 people, 3 of the stores are selling my book in her town.
Yeah.
So I have a few really keen marketing.
Yes. Your agents out and about.
Yes.
Tell everybody, how did you, when you self-published on Kindle Direct Publishing or Amazon Direct Publishing, Kindle Direct Publishing on the Amazon platform, how do you get 100 books to have at your book signing? What did you tell them what you have to do? It's not.
Oh, okay. Well, when you're in the KDP, once you've uploaded your book and you've pressed the publish, so it's available on Amazon now, you can go to the author copies and order 100 and you get it at our author's price.
Yes.
So it's basically a wholesale price.
Yes.
And then you could sell it for what you want. Well, you're getting it at the price that say a store would get it.
Right. So let's say if the author copies are $10, you could sell it for $20 or $25, whatever you sell it for. And then that $15 is yours to keep to apply to the cost of putting the book together or some profit off of the book. So it's wonderful that you were able to do that.
Yeah. And that's how I'm supplying the local people here.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating that I think is amazing about this platform is I had a friend of my best friend growing up. It lives in London, England. And I just told her, hey, I just put it on Amazon. Well, she just went straight to Amazon in the UK, ordered it straight off of the UK, and she got her book before anyone else did in London, England.
Yeah.
And then right away, of course, I told my friends in Canada, and they were able to do the same. They go right to Amazon Canada, and it's shipped to them.
Nice.
And if I want to sell to a Canadian store, I actually, instead of shipping from here, which would cost quite a bit from here, Amazon will ship it. I tell them print 10 at my author copies, ship it to these people, and then I get billed, but then I bill the store that wants to get them. So there's some real advantages. Now, I have run into some stores that don't want to sell it because it's from Amazon.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a thing for competition, and I get it. You know, it's hard on these small independent stores, which I want to support.
Right.
That I printed it. So I did upload it to a site they do want, Ingram Spark.
Correct.
But the printing quality is nowhere near as good as Amazon.
That's interesting.
So I tell them that you can go directly to Ingram Spark. That's where I've also uploaded the PDF files, but it's not as good or printing, but you're welcome to order it right from there too.
For some reason, was there an option on Amazon to add a distribution option? Do you remember that when we were going through it? I've got to look and see.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, I know that Ingram Spark does offer it, but it is interesting. The print quality isn't as good.
Yeah, I was shocked too. I thought that it wouldn't matter, but there's definitely been there's been some interesting stuff with the printing, even within the Amazon, because Amazon has printers all over the US, all over the UK, like the Canadian, which I say to the book publishers, at least these books are getting published within our own countries.
Yeah, this one says this one was printed in Middletown, Delaware.
Yes, and I have one that was printed in Troutdale, Oregon.
Yeah.
So I say it's printed locally. It's using local. So that's a good part of it.
Right.
It's not getting printed in China. So It is a neat part, but they still is a lot of animosity between the small businesses and the big giant Amazon. So I respect that.
Yeah, they would want us to come to their local bookstore or business to buy our books all the time.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that too. Right.
Yeah. So I that's why I put it through Ingram Spark for them to order it.
But, because they can stand at their computer then in their bookstore and look your book up and have it shipped directly from Ingram Spark into their store, just like they would do for any other title that they would have there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So no, that's good. But yeah, it's wonderful. And I do think that there's pros and cons to Kindle Direct Publishing. I do think it was pretty accessible to use from a self-publishing perspective, in particular if you're doing it all yourself. And there's a lot of information out there about how to do it, but there's not a ton about how to do a cookbook. So I thoroughly enjoyed the process also. And it was great, working with people like you who just were so willing to learn the process as we were going along, literally from like week to week. Like I'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do this week. And we would do it. And then next week I'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I love doing stuff like that, laying out the schedule, having everybody meet, and then the little goals and things in between. So
yeah, no, it was great. It was a very good way to help someone who already has the idea to want to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you had to have some stuff prepared ahead of time.
Yep.
Otherwise,
yeah, I think you need to come to that particular course, like with an idea that I'm about 25 or 30 recipes that I want to publish in this book, like pretty much like almost written and ready to go.
Yes. Yeah. And really have your ideas down.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all the technical stuff is really helpful to learn in your course. So
what about technology? If someone wants to use the platform, what were the barriers from a technology perspective?
Oh, I mean, I guess I use Canva, and I was very fortunate I have two 20-year-old children.
Yeah.
And they were always, and my daughter does work on Canva. So that was really helpful. So just the design stuff and how to add things in, and sometimes, change sizes of fonts, just little things that, of course, some people, this would not be a problem at all. If you've been on Word or if you're a designer at all, this is easy.
Yeah.
But for me, uploading the photos, what size, I found out later that some of my photos were too large because I did take a few of them in the raw format and I didn't downsize it. Yeah. So I did have to learn about, bringing it to the right size that would fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So if anybody wants to connect with you, well, you can, of course, buy the books listed on Amazon. Rue's Kitchen.
Yes.
Bone broth soups and sourdough sides. So you can look that up. Is there a way to connect with you online?
Yes, I have a website now. It's called rueskitchen.com. And also they can email me anytime at lorrainr61@gmail.com.
Okay.
But also my website has all my contact information too.
Great. And I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. And I do have an Instagram account and a Facebook account, but I'm not super active. Maybe I'll get a little more active.
So I think the other thing about this, one of the other myths is people think I have to have a ton of followers to write a cookbook and get it published. Is that true?
I don't think so at all. Yeah. No, I don't. I didn't. I mean, I of course used to have another website. It was called freshhealthycooking.com. So that's long gone.
Right.
So I did I did, of course, have those people that when I did tell them about the book, a lot of them did want to buy it. It does have a little bit of help if you want to sell, but if your purpose is more, you just want to get a book out there locally, or which is really, really great to have a local book, or you just want to make it for your family and friends, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But if you're looking to make, $1 million, this isn't the easiest way to do it.
No, you have to sell a lot of books. I think that's an interesting question, though, because then people would say, well, Lorraine, was it worth it?
And I'd say, yes, of course it was. But,
right.
But if you had to depend on this to pay your bills, then no,
yes.
Unless you have a lot of followers and they're going to buy your book, that's
right.
Then it's a financial gain for you.
Yeah.
This is more a goal-oriented gain, and I guess you have a different meter. I mean, the financial meter and then your life meter. And I think this is definitely down my life meter. I'm feeling a little more fuller, a little more the challenge to meet, and just the purpose in life. What I always think food is a big thing. I love feeding people. I love sharing recipes. So that part is full. So I think everything is not about money.
100%. I agree about that also. But I do agree, if you have a following, you have a website, you have a blog, you have family recipes, this is a perfect avenue to get a book like this finished. And it's not a huge book. It's a very focused topic, which I think actually probably in the end is easier to sell to people that don't know you because it's so specific.
Right.
People will either know this is for them or they'll know it's not for them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true.
And that actually makes books more attractive if they know this looks like it's for me. I think so. Yeah. I know I sometimes, when I'm looking for a certain topic book, I mean, I own a couple just purely sourdough books. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were very influential, and that's what I needed. I needed that intense one subject book.
Yeah.
And I love the books that have a lot of recipes too. I mean, they're wonderful to flip through, but when you're trying to learn a subject, the one subject one is great.
It is great.
Or one or two.
Yeah. So congratulations. You have been the myth-busting cookbook writer today. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be a photographer. And you do not have to have a lot of followers to write and publish your own cookbook.
All right. Mythbuster. Yes.
Amazing. Well, keep us posted. If there's any subsequent books, just, let us know. It's been a joy to connect with you. I have to say that promoting a business online these days, it's not a joke. It's just it's a very full, busy space. But one of the pleasures I find in it, though, is that I have the capacity now to connect with people like you, from Kentucky to Oregon, sharing our love for cooking, our love for recipes, food, and family, and getting these recipes in the hands of the people that want them. And it's just incredible that we can do this all online. I mean, we had students in our class from Chicago, Australia,
Canada,
all over the place. Yeah, all over. So it was really, really fun to internationally meet and to talk about creating our own cookbooks.
Yeah, I agree. Technology, parts of it I hate, and other things I think it's incredible. Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of learning we need. There's a lot of abuse, a lot of people, including myself, that waste a lot of time sometimes, flipping through whatever. And you're like, okay, what's this doing?
Yeah.
But in these cases, yes, it's incredible that I could listen to a podcast, connect with you on Zoom, learn about someone in Australia that I, one day might be able to actually meet. You never know.
Exactly. No, you don't ever know. You don't ever know. Right. And now here you are back on the same podcast talking about the book that you created. So it's just a full circle moment. And I want to thank you for being a great participant in all of it, listening to the podcast, coming to the class, doing the work, because it is work. It's not like it doesn't just happen. You do have to definitely apply yourself, and probably in a lot of new ways that you were not familiar with doing.
Yes, that's so true.
Yeah. And then the life meter just goes it's really true. The life meter side of writing a cookbook, it's a huge fulfilling project.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to be able to do. So thank you so much for being willing to come on the show and talk about it today, share your experience with other people. And I'm sure you've inspired people to not only make sourdough, bone broth, traditional cooking methods, but also consider perhaps self-publishing their own cookbook.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thanks
welcome.
For putting on the course.
Yeah, it's great. And I'll be in touch and talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts. And you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.